But when Tucker says that the American population needs to know, the reality is that Americans, for the most part, they didn't even know where Ukraine was before it was brought up in this special military operation. But more importantly, what they don't understand is what the cost is when America has trillions in debt. I think we're at 130% our GDP. So when America has so much debt and then we're doing all of this deficit spending, not to benefit Americans or our country's infrastructure, but to play a game of war and geopolitics against Russia and whoever else. See, those are the things that the average American citizen doesn't understand. But you know what? I think that this has been historically true when you think back into what you learned in history class, right? Do you not recall that history is merely the recounting of wars and who won? When you hear of the name Alexander the Great, why was he great? Conquering. You hear the name of Julius Caesar. Why was he the great Caesar? Because he was a conqueror. In fact, a genocidal, murderous lunatic. I mean, look what he did to the Gauls. And you hear all of these names, Attila the Hun. These are all the names of bloodthirsty conquerors, which is to say that historically you have madmen who reach the top of a political structure and their essential goal is to expand infinitely until someone stops them. See Napoleon Bonaparte as an example, and many others. And those are the men that we recall in history. So we have to know that the average person in any society, the average people, you are where we pull the soldier population from. You guys are the ones we send off to die for the glory of the Alexander the Great, so that he can have a name that rings through the halls of history. Yes, we sacrifice your sons, and you get no benefit from the fact that your son has had his blood shed on foreign soil. You see, very rarely those names that we mentioned, Attila the Hun, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great, none of those were people defending their homeland. Those were all the names of conquerors and invaders who would expand their empires. You see, there's no glory in defending the homeland. As the Master Sun Tzu states, defense implies lack. Offense or attack implies abundance. So history and the men who stand out in history, they're the conquerors, the ones who expand their empires, and they get the glory and all of the benefits of war and conquest. The average people, they lose their lives. And also the coffers of the state, which is to say the government, run empty often, and then the social welfare programs disappear. And if you do collect some booty from war, which is to say some profit from war, it usually will first go to the leaders, the aristocracy. They might share a little bit of that with the soldiery so that they don't revolt, but the everyday people rarely benefit. And ironically, they used to benefit more in ancient times. In modern times, this money goes to large American corporations. So I point that out to show to you all that this is not new. This is why history is important. You understand that the behavior of the United States is the same behavior you've observed empires exercise in the past, whether it's the British Empire or others. And the fact that the average person doesn't benefit greatly is the same thing that has occurred in the past. Everything is the same. The Roman emperors, they would have a circus or the gladiator games, and then the brain dead Roman population, that is to say the plebeians, they would go there, have bad seats, and try to watch one of their own be hacked to pieces by a wild animal, while the patricians and the emperor sits in comfortable seating and they enjoy the game. And for them, it's just a game. But for the peasants and the plebeians watching the circus or watching the gladiator games, it's an escape from a hard, unpleasant life. And that's the precise same thing that you have today with average people using sport to escape from a very unpleasant life in which they struggle to scratch out mere survival. I was driving yesterday behind a woman in a black SUV, and it had a black Raiders license plate. And I just had to shake my head thinking, you're such a fool taking out your time to represent a team that means nothing. When I was a youngster, the Raiders were in Oakland. When my father was a youngster, the Raiders were probably somewhere else. This is just a commercial entity. There's no allegiance to the city. And after all, it's grown men playing children's games. Yes, I played football when I was in the 3rd grade. But I point all of this out to say that the average person is a dimwit, which is fine. And they've always been a dimwit. And they'll never really understand. And they'll always lose when it comes to money and power and government allocation. So what I want you all to understand is when I come to speak to you, I come to bless you with knowledge such that you don't have to suffer. If you're a fan of the Raiders, you're probably suffering of stupidity. Yes, you're focusing on the wrong things. While inflation eats away at your cash, poor people, low-income people tend to keep their wealth in cash, and they have an insignificant amount of it. They have a small amount of cash in the bank account, small amount, and inflation makes that money valueless. Wealthy people put their money into assets like real estate, gold, commodities, things like this, so that when inflation occurs, they don't lose their value of their money to inflation. But poor people can't afford assets like real estate because the way the filthy government that rules in America has arranged things. Today, an average person is a poor person. However, if you look back 50 years ago, an average person was a middle-class person. What? Yes. An average person today is a poor person in America. An average person 50 years ago was a middle-class person who could buy a house, who could get the basics that we all deserve. And I know that there are some strange plans going on around the planet Earth because in my last trip, I was trying my best to buy land, had everything that was needed to buy land, had all the money you could want to buy land, and I couldn't find any land that I could buy. And I was looking in 3 different countries. That should strike you as strange. And one thing I also noticed about the real estate trends is the plots of land that they build the houses on are so small. People are trying to sell me villas in United Arab Emirates or in Oman. They're trying to sell me villas, but the villa's not even on a 1/4 acre. So why are you trying to sell me a 5-bedroom mini mansion that's on less than a 1/4 acre? Why? Why is there such little land left for you and I? Why? Why do the climate change people talk about climate and preserving the earth, but they do nothing to stop this war, which drops bombs and material that destroys and poisons the earth? Why are the climate change people not anti-war people? Why will they stand in traffic in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and disrupt the society for climate change, but they don't do the same thing to prevent war and bloodshed? If your reason that you would want to preserve the earth is to preserve life on earth, why are you not anti-war at the same level? It should make you suspicious. I promise you, we are watching, but we are not seeing.
Human disaster. It's left hundreds of thousands of people dead, an entire generation of young Ukrainians, and it's depopulated the largest country in Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound.
He said it's depopulated the largest country in Europe. What I want you all to fundamentally understand is that war is not necessarily a natural thing, but it is necessarily natural that people who are ugly and broke, either they suffer one of these 2 things growing up. And as a result, they need to be admired. They need to be put on a pedestal. They feel the need to get your attention. They feel the need to control you. They want to be up here. They want to feel superior. They have to exercise power over you and I. And that's why they do these things that are mentally ill. Warfare is mentally ill, generally speaking. Ask yourself, what sense does NATO actually make? None at all. What sense does the war between NATO and Russia actually make? None at all. Except that you have people who are so mentally ill and greedy that they seek to control everything. They seek to expand infinitely beyond what is their own. That is why war and fighting and violence must occur when you have those people who are black-hearted and they want more than what is theirs. And they force others to become violent in defending themselves and defending what is theirs. Huh? Every time you see war, it was from a sick person seeking to take more than what is theirs. Acknowledge Quat sends in a question. He writes, Mr. Burton, I'm currently working on price testing for my 2 product designs, but I'm having trouble finding comparable products for my blue design. I found one for my red design, but it's from a known brand in the market. Number 1, should I use my black red design photos without the logo to test? Well, I think your logo is quite minimal, so I think it's fine. Number 2, how should I test the blue design? I have no photos for it since it's yet to be created. Well, I think you'd maybe just take a poll and ask people if they prefer the blue design or the black design and see what's more popular. And once you find out which is more popular, then I would price test a shoe that looks closest to that one. Know that life isn't perfect, and in business you have to estimate, you have to forecast, but you're not dealing with certainty, you're dealing with uncertainty. And that is why those of us who have the emotional intelligence to engage in business will have things that average people don't have, because they cannot deal with certainty, they cannot deal with trying to see into an uncertain future. Carrying on.
This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances, and the sanctions that followed have as well. And in total, they have upended the world economy. The post-World War II economic order, the system that guaranteed...
He just said so much. Dumb people are probably watching like, why do you keep pausing the video? Well, I'm pausing it because in these short sentences, he's saying so many things that must be unpacked. Huh? So let's dig in deep.
In Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound. This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances.
He said the global military and trade alliances. Do I think that it is currently reshaped military alliances? No, I don't. In fact, I find that the pre-existing military alliances and the pre-existing neutral countries have stayed where they are. No one's moved an inch in terms of how things were already arranged. So I don't think that's true. However, with regards to the trade alliances, I don't think there are alliances. I don't like the language there, because when you use the term alliance, we tend to think of warfare. Not to say that economics does not involve warfare, but what we're really looking at is higher levels of cooperation between certain nation states. And when you have economic cooperation, you're going to have tighter bonds. But let us note that a lot of the countries that have started cooperating at a higher level have pre-existing relationships that are worth noting. So, for example, when the idiotic Biden administration decided to put these crippling sanctions on Russia, which haven't crippled anybody, they have done something that was damaging to the self. You hear me? America and Europe, they said, we're going to hurt Russia with sanctions. Well, it turned out they hurt themselves. Look at Germany. For example, Germany used to be Europe's strongest economy. Now Germany's economy is suffering, and IMF has reduced Germany's rating, while at the same time forecasting that Russia is going to have decent economic growth moving forward this year and next year, primarily due to their success in being an energy provider. And the reason they've been able to do that and not suffer as a result of Western sanctions is because the West is delusional. Yes, the West no longer deals in the truth. The West deals in lies. Is that a man or a woman? I don't know. I'm not allowed to say. I live in the West. The West deals in lies, and because they deal in lies and they suffer a certain kind of blindness, they're not seeing what is truly there. They tried to treat Russia like an Iraq. They tried to treat Russia like Iran. They tried to treat Russia like North Korea. What do you mean, Marquette? Well, for example, Iraq was a country that America had already militarily vanquished before. I think that was that called the Desert Storm or Gulf Gulf War. Wow. It's hard to keep up with America's wars, but it was George Bush Sr., the one who was the CIA director. You know, that shadowy organization that has an infinite budget and does not account to anyone and never gets audited. That organization, the one that kills foreign leaders, and like pretends to be a good organization today, but every declassified piece of information we get, we find that these people are war criminals. Yeah, that organization and that president. Yeah, they were brutalizing Iraq back in the day. Then they hit Iraq with financial or economic sanctions, which never is successful for regime change. Look at the history. It's very clear. Regime change is often the goal of the United States of America, and they use the CIA to execute on this, and execute is the operative term. They're often trying to murder the heads of state of other countries. They attempted this on Bashar al-Assad in Syria. It didn't work. They did this successfully with Muammar Gaddafi and as well Saddam Hussein. The point is the sanctions didn't work. That's why they had to go in and kill these guys, right? So they use sanctions, and what the sanctions do work at is hurting the average person. So it drives people into great poverty, everyday people. It robs them of the ability to have affordable foods, to have access to medicine, to have access to the benefits of international trade. And so the average person suffers greatly. In the theory of change for the Westerners who are claiming to be good people, they're not good people at all. The Western governments, their idea is that if we can squeeze your population into utter dire poverty, and we can make the Cuban people or the Libyan people or the Iraqis or whomever or the North Korean people so poor and miserable, they'll start blaming their leader for their current state, and then they will create revolution. Well, this is consistently not happened. What does happen is you have people suffering starvation and things like that. You tend to solidify the people behind their leader, and then eventually America has to start an outright war or send in special forces or covert forces to kill the leader. But the sanctions rarely work. It does keep the countries poor, which will impact their ability to engage in warfare, especially when it's a smaller country like, say, Cuba. We like to pick on the small ones, Cuba, North Korea, Iraq. But if it's a mid-sized country with decent technology like Iran, then the sanctions don't really hit the same. And if it's a large country like Russia, well, America should know, because we use this term all the time. Russia's too big to fail. Where does America use that term? When we're talking about our money-grubbing, greedy banksters. Yes, when the banks gamble your money, our money, the money of the American citizens, when they gamble it and lose on these contrived financial markets with these unsafe securities, when they gamble and lose, then the American taxpayer, the government, right, uses the American taxpayers' money to bail out the banks, because some of the banks are too big to fail. So you take what should be a private company that should fail and go out of business, and you basically turn it into a government entity, which is why I always tell you that there's no such thing as private banks. They're just an appendage of the government. So they stop the bank from failing because it's too big to fail. It would hurt too many people, would impact too many institutions negatively. The same thing is actually true of Russia. It's too big to fail. It's too big a country, too big a population, too many natural resources. Russia can't be removed from the international scene. No, they offer too much value. Come on now. So as a result, they're going to continue being a trade partner with China, India, Iran, and others. And in fact, with the sanctions, because Russia, as a result, had to lower the prices of their goods, they're selling cheap goods to China, India, and others. And so China is increasing their trade engagement with Russia. So you've actually pushed these two partners even closer. But let us not forget that historically, these two entities have great ties. What I was saying in terms of the reality, in terms of the way trade is changing. And I remember when I was a young person, I would hear this term of international trade. I wonder, what does that mean? Just to clarify for those who don't find this to be very clear, trade is the concept, simply put, of a nation, exporting goods to another nation. Just like the fact that, we see Toyotas and Hondas here and all of these cars that are foreign cars, Mercedes, BMWs, etc. These are not American-made cars. These cars have arrived here through trade and cooperation with other nations. I'll tell you a funny story. When I travel around the world, I rarely see Fords. I travel around the world, I rarely see a Chevy or a GMC around the world. And that lets you know that America is slipping, losing our position. Our government is foolish and bloodthirsty, bloodthirsty, engaged in war, but not remembering that we need to export products around the world instead of buying everybody else's crap. Huh? It used to be that we had some pride here and some nationalism here. We don't even have security here. A report just came out pointing out that many of the people coming through the southern border don't even speak Spanish. Why? Because they ain't Latino. Who are they? Ethnic Chinese. Ethnic Chinese. Now, if China is your largest competitor, which it obviously is, then you should be scared about that, worried about that. That's how covert agents come in. That's how spies come in. That's how espionage gets set up. Sneak these folks into our country through the back door. Come on now. We're in a Cold War. We've been in a Cold War for a long time. Now, here's the dumb move. The misstep and mistake that America has made in attempting to isolate Russia, which is damn near impossible given the modern mode of international capitalism. You cannot isolate Russia, but what you did is you pushed them closer to the great country of China and, of course, to Iran, which is always going to do deals with our enemies, right? And what happens now is Russia and China are reunited. Reunited, and it feels so good. Reunited. What do you mean reunited, Marquette? Were they ever the same country or something like that? No, they were never the same country. However, if you look back in the history, I think it's about 1917 was the Russian Revolution. Marquette, are you that sharp? Let me do a fact check. God damn it, I might not be that good. Russian Revolution. Am I that good? Come on. 1917. Goddamn, I'm good. Yeah, 1917 Russian Revolution. Blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. The czars, they get ended in a violent way. Yeah, killed the family as well to make sure that they don't come back. Who are the czars? Those are the Russian royals who essentially takes over the Soviets, right? Then the Soviets give way to the Bolsheviks. These are the group of people led by Vladimir Lenin. Okay, fantastic. He came out of exile, basically took over Russia after the czars were violently taken out of power, the czarist regime. And they needed to go because they were pretty unforgiving and not understanding. People were living bad. So then you got the Bolsheviks, which are essentially communists, and you have Vladimir Lenin, who was indeed an intellectual, and he came under the ideology or the philosophy, the thinking of Karl Marx. And then what they did was they started to export this thinking called communism and socialism, these strange isms based on equality and also authoritarianism. But that's neither here nor there. And they supported other revolutionary movements, which is why historically, certain Western countries did not like the communists because they did not want their country to be upset by communism. Like, here's an example, right? So even in the United Kingdom today, you still have these goofballs who think they're royalty, to think that they have divine blood. That's why they're Earl of this, Earl of Sussex, and the Duke of Wellington, and, the king of this and the queen of that, right? They're still there and got hella money too. Now, here's the thing. If they were in Russia, they'd be dead because that's what happened to the czar and his family, right? So they wanted to contain communism, they being the Western European countries, because they saw what could happen. Kings lose heads in Russia. They didn't want that to happen in their own country. Also, communism, we talking about equality. To say that you're a king or a queen, oh, you don't believe in equality. So they had to contain communism. Communism was exported from Russia. At that point, it wasn't just communism, it just wasn't Marxism, it was Leninist Marxism, which is to say Vladimir Lenin put his own intellectual spin on it, and it went into China. Picked up by a gentleman named Mao Zedong. Yeah, some would call him the father of modern China. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Now, they were able to export not only the ideology into China, but they also engaged in technology transfer and much else. In fact, a lot of the terms you hear that describe the governmental structure in the USSR are the same terms you hear in China today, like the Politburo and entities such as this. Now, understand this. When we're talking about the export of, Marxist Leninism, Lenin had to make some modifications to Marxism to make it fit the Russian situation. If you understand Marxism, which pretty much none of you do. I was talking with a YouTuber, a famous YouTuber, supposed to be an intellectual recently, actually not recently, before I took my trip. And he even made some reference to Marx, but I could tell he hadn't read Das Kapital, and he does not actually understand Marxism or communism itself, which is not surprising. Very few do. Das Kapital is quite a serious volume to read. Some people have read the Communist Manifesto, but it gets deeper than that. The point is this: the idea from Marx, simply put for the layman, is that you would experience communism, which is a system that comes after capitalism has reached an asymptote or maturity. You know, capitalism reaches maturity when you have machines producing and doing what man used to do, right? You've gone from manufacturing, men making things with their hands, to machinofacture, which is to say machines are doing everything, robotics, all these things. And so as a result, human beings don't have jobs because machines are doing the jobs. They're replacing the jobs of the factory workers and the low-income people, the serfs and things like that. So communism had to occur, according to Marx, in a developed economy. And Marx predicted it would occur somewhere like in Britain or America, because these were the leading advanced economies. So when Vladimir Lenin got a hold of Marxism, he was in a retrograde economy, Russia, which has a lot of peasants and serfs and rural people. The idea that Marx had was that this would come from urban people. This would come from people in a developed economy where you have advanced technology that takes the jobs of human beings. But instead, Lenin said, I can rewrite Marx. I can make some adjustments to make it work here because, God damn it, I'm ready for a revolution. We got the Tsar out. Now let's get this communist revolution popping. And so he edited and modified Marx, and that's why it's called Lenin or Marxist Leninism. And Lenin basically created the idea that no, communist revolution can occur even in a retrograde economy where you have an agrarian population that's largely, farming and all this stuff. No, it can occur here. So he rewrote it, then exported it to China. China was backward at that time. China was also largely peasant and serf based and, farmers and rural, right? So it made perfect sense. And Mao Zedong was the communist leader. Now, you might have heard of, Taiwan and China, and people always like, the Americans say Taiwan is his own country, right? America likes to do that, just like they say North Korea and South Korea are not the same thing, right? America's often splitting things. They even split Germany in half at one point. There was West Germany and there was the DDR, East Germany. But eventually it was put back together because if it's a European country, they usually put that shit back together in many cases. But here's the thing. Mao was against the nationalists. I think it was Chiang Kai-shek. I forget. I know too much. Probably forgotten more than most YouTubers have ever learned. But there was the nationalists and there were the communists, and they were at war trying to dominate China. Mao was the communist, and I think it was Chiang Kai-shek. Someone can correct me, I'm sure. The nationalists, they eventually fled onto Taiwan, right? So the Maoists, the communists, were being supported by the other communists on the planet Earth. And as a result, they were able to win. The United States was giving inadequate support to the nationalists. They lost. They went to Taiwan. So that's why on Taiwan, the island or the Taiwan, the fake country, those people are ethnically Chinese, Han Chinese. Those people speak Mandarin. They're Chinese. It's China, except America protected it and allowed it to be its own separate thing with its own separate name and American protection. China was still developing, and that's why Hong Kong was initially not part of China, because the British were controlling that as a colonial power, and Taiwan was largely protected by America. But now that China's strong and now it can flex its muscles and dominate, they're like, hey, you got to give us Hong Kong back. And the British did. And now they're like, hey, you got to give us Taiwan back. And they about to take it. Okay. So here's the thing. Now you have a situation where China was developed by Russia. Russia sent over engineers. Russia sent over ideologists. Russia sent over teachers. Russia sent over personnel. Russia sent over military advisors. Russia sent over every resource they could to rise China up out of the mud and develop China rapidly, such that they could be a good partner and a good, strong communist ally. And China has been communist for a long time, but when they saw the USSR fall, defeated by American capitalism, During that time, China was going through its own evolution. The problem with communism is that it's not an effective economic system. So as a result, every communist country that's ever existed has been broke, poor. Look at Cuba, broke, poor. Yes, we did put sanctions on them, but either way, centrally planned economies don't work. And that's why the USSR eventually suffered and broke apart, centrally planned economy. And I'm sure various other problems. But China smartened up. They still call themselves communists, but they ran a capitalist economy. This occurred during Deng Xiaoping. And I think Deng Xiaoping did these economic reforms during the 1980s, if I recall correctly. I wasn't there. I was not even born, but I studied this thing. So Deng Xiaoping did economic reforms, and then eventually Xi Jinping took over. And he is today's version of Mao. He removed term limits, yes. So when he took over, he's basically in there for all time as of now. He is, in fact, a dictator. America claims they don't like dictators, but everything here is made in China. I got a brand new MacBook Pro from Apple, which is an American corporation, but this damn thing was made in China. Huh? But we don't like dictators and we're pro-democracy. Bullshit. Is Saudi Arabia a democracy? Is the United Arab Emirates a democracy? Please stop the nonsense. Anyways, American government is filthy and it's always lying, and the American citizen is brain dead. That's why we're in this situation today. Nothing more dangerous than having the dumbest kid on the block has all the weapons. That's the situation we're in today. But anyways, the point is this. Historically, the China of today, the Russia of today are both two large countries that were born of communist revolution, essentially. They supported each other in their development over time. Oh, and here's another important thing. They are right next to each other, God damn it. Do we need to pull out a map here? Yeah, they're right next to each other. So that being the case, they have every reason to be collaborative, similar ideology. They're both fairly homogenous countries. They both have been at war, either through hot war or cold war with the United States over time. Do you think that they are not going to collaborate and be friends to the end, especially when you cause Russia to sell even cheaper goods to China and China loves it? That was utterly stupid move on America's part. Utterly stupid. And we don't even have any leverage to punish China for collaborating with the Russians and making our sanctions thereby ineffective. Yes, we're in a strange world today. And all of you should be scared, because here's the weird thing. You know, like, none of this stuff makes sense, right? I remember when 9/11 first happened and they blamed the Saudis, while America was still an ally of Saudi Arabia, even though it wasn't the Saudis. But think about how confused the average American citizen would be if they were actually paying attention. Wait, we're allies with the Saudis, but we're blaming the Saudis for 9/11? You just can't understand anything. We love democracy, but we're good friends with dictators like, China and the Saudis and the Emiratis. Those are not democratic regimes. The average citizen would... Your brain's going to implode from all the BS. But anyways, the point is this. Tucker is not correct when he says that it's reshaped global military alliances. The global military alliances have remained fairly fixed. The Western Europeans have been a part of NATO. And the colonial powers have always stuck together historically. They might fight each other, but they don't ever align against each other with outsiders. So you have all the European countries stick together. And the only interesting thing is that the Western propaganda has been so effective that it's largely confused the Eastern European countries that are former Soviet Union satellite countries. Those little countries that are largely irrelevant. Latvia type countries. They're small, not very relevant, but they have significant numbers of Russians within the territory. They have Russian speakers within the territory. Their culture is much more Russian than it is Western European or American, but yet they side with the West. It's largely for financial benefits. America pumped a tremendous amount of money into Europe, and that's been our strategy, is screw the American citizen. They get nothing. They get no health care. They get no clean drinking water. They get no good public schools. They get no infrastructure. They get no pothole-free roads. Let's send our money to foreign nations so they can be friends and collaborate with our elite class in bringing war around the world, so that the warlords who rule us can feel satisfied with their peculiar psyches. That's what's going on. So these little irrelevant countries join up into NATO, even though they're really no major asset to NATO, and they're not under threat from Russia. That's the other funny part. They're not under threat from Russia by any means. So I say that to say this. None of the countries that are in NATO now or have joined NATO or are wanting to join NATO, none of those countries were previously aligned against America or aligned with Russia since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So Tucker is not correct or accurate when he says that there's a reshaping of the global military alliances. That's just frankly not true. The trade alliances, I don't like the term alliances, but the balance of trade between certain nations has changed dramatically, and that's an accurate observation. And that is unfortunate for America, and it's also unfortunate for Germany. Their economy is clearly suffering. America's debt is going out of control, and Russia seems to be doing just fine. So the sanctions have actually probably hurt the Europeans more than it's hurt the Russians. And I've even said this before. I mean, think about it. If you're Russia and you have McDonald's and Netflix and all these foreign American companies and American banks, when America pulls their companies, JP Morgan, Chase, and all these other companies out of your country, they did you a favor, actually. They actually did you a favor. You didn't even have to kick the companies out. They left on their own. Now, what do? You replace them with Russian companies, right? So now the money is staying within your country. That's a clear benefit, right? These are the kind of simple things you hear Black Americans talk about. Buy Black, which is to say buy from our own community. Well, now that's what Russia is doing now that you pulled out international capital. I mean, come on now. This is silliness. And Russia's not a backwards country. It's not an underdeveloped retrograde economy like you might find in sub-Saharan Africa where they need foreign direct investment. I mean, the Russians doing all right. So you did them a favor, silly Billy. May I acknowledge Rodney, also known as Teddy Fresh, should have known, comes in with a double baller alert. And he writes, "Peace to the Saints. You deserve all the recognition. You allowed individuals to invest in a product, facilitated return on investment analysis, and provided manufacturing assistance." Facts. Such initiatives demonstrate an exemplary commitment to fostering entrepreneurial endeavors within the Sasson community. No one else is doing anything close. No one else is doing anything close. Thank you. It's almost like people aren't noticing. I sent out a fucking over $250,000 cold hard cash to you. And it's almost like no one notices. That's what I find strange. It's almost like nobody notices. It's like, I guess it's like everyday shit, apparently. Anyways, may I acknowledge EJ. He writes, supporting the work, Peace of the Saints, can be read. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay, EJ. So send your email to support@marquettism.com and ccjason@marquettism.com. So email support ccjason@marquettism.com and cc me at marquettism.com. We want to make sure we can get this done for you. And we will give you the details of how to get listed on the sites. So we do have a new way of doing things. I don't know if you were already briefed on that by the customer service team. But if not, we'll give you another briefing. Shout out to Emmanuel, comes in with a baller alert via Cash App. Also, shout out to Mr. Thompson, sent in support. May I also acknowledge Jasper writes, Quet, can you think of any other country whose GDP is somewhat comparable to the U.S., where it is the norm for women to not be active in the workforce? Peace to the Saints. No, that's no. Let's just say that. But here's the problem. Often you find that GDP is referenced. GDP is irrelevant. GDP is the size of your economy, right? Gross domestic product is the size of the economy. When you really want to look at what average people are experiencing, what's the quality of life in a country, a better measure is perhaps GDP per capita, which is to say, or like looking at the average income. And then when you look at the average income, you also want to look at the average rates, cost of rent, average cost of living, and see how people are getting along in the society. I would much rather be in a country with much lower GDP, but a higher per capita income. I'd much rather be in a country with lower GDP, with lower rates of incarceration, higher, lower rates of violent crime, and frankly, higher levels of homogeneity, whether it's racial or religious or what have you. Like, for example, and I should probably do a live on this. You guys got to let me know if you want me to do it. I spent a significant amount of time in Dubai, in I think it was my 5th trip. And this last trip, it was just extraordinarily peaceful. And I'd love to describe to you what my experiences were. And for one, like, of all the time I was there, which was a significant amount of time, I didn't see one single homeless person, not one the entire time, not one homeless person, not one person asked me for change the entire time, or money the entire time. And so the lifestyle there in Dubai is much better than you would probably get in America. A person who earns a middle class, actually, I don't want to say middle class. Let me say this: my income in Dubai versus my income here, or let's just say United Arab Emirates in general, or the Middle East in general, I can have a house that is bigger than the house I have here, which is also big. But in addition to that, I can also hire a chef, a personal driver, and a cleaning staff, all of which are full time and live at my property. And I can do that comfortably in that country. And that country is also extraordinarily safe. No homeless people that I saw in my 5 trips there. So GDP doesn't matter. Per capita income matters. And there's a number of other human development measures that are more critical. And to your point about women being included in the workforce, Saudi has a decent standard of living, UAE as well, and they don't have women included in the workforce at the same level that Americans do. Thank you for that question.
And the sanctions that followed have as well. And in total, they have upended the world economy. The post-World War II economic order, the system that guaranteed prosperity in the West for more than 80 years, is coming apart very fast, and along with it, the dominance of the US dollar. These are not small changes. They are history-altering developments. They will define the lives of our grandchildren. Most of the world.
So one of the problems while we're over here trying to marginalize Russia militarily, we're forgetting about the economic war, right? And I'm going to try not to get too deep with you guys, but this BRICS concept, Brazil, Russia, and all this other crap, that's really what America needs to contain, especially when you've tried to marginalize Russia. And now you have a number of commodities and core staple goods and products being sold not through the US dollar, but being sold using a different currency as a reserve, using the dirham, using yuan, using all these other things that are not the dollar. That's really the problem. But let's talk briefly, if you would just bear with me a second, so you can understand why you are so much poorer as a middle-class American than your grandmother and grandfather were as middle-class Americans. Yes, when I've said it in the past, it was true. When I said that you could be a janitor and you could afford to have your wife stay at home and you could still buy a house and have a good lifestyle as a janitor, that was a fact. Why? Well, when you look way back in American history, let's just say the history of the world real quick, it was that we had a gold standard, which is to say the paper money was connected to gold, something real and something that presumably has a level of scarcity. And because money is connected to gold, money had real value. It was anchored to something. When money left the gold standard, before it did that, there's some interesting things worth noting. Around the world, countries used a gold standard. They kind of tied their money to gold at some level. But with these world wars going on, and they're always European affairs, right? The truth is there is some wickedness among those people in their leadership class. No doubt they seem to consistently have the world wars start in Europe. Something wrong with their leadership class. But the fact is, you have these European nation states using advanced weapons to destroy one another and to destroy the world and destroy the earth. Then America goes and gets into the business of, rebuilding Europe. It's curious as to why and what the logic was. That's another story, but they have the Marshall Plan and all these other efforts. You have Richard Nixon, and I think it was under his presidency, I want to say 71, that we go off of the gold standard. But before that, the US dollar became the reserve currency for the world, which is to say, when you're measuring the price of oil or the price of various things, or you're engaging in international trade, you can use the dollar as a reserve, reliable currency around the world. So it was kind of like a gold standard. Then America's dollar was tied directly to gold. And so America's dollar was like a proxy. It was a reserve currency for the world. Bear with me here. And then America removed the dollar from the gold standard in 71. Then we saw consumer prices shoot up and get hella weird. When consumer prices start to get weird, what I'm saying is inflation caused the price of goods to skyrocket, and also the price of real estate, which is why you can't buy a house. So we saw the prices of various things increase significantly. And then also, here's another thing you might not realize, is that many of the people you call forefathers in America, the people who came before us, like the framers of the Constitution, all these kinds of guys, they didn't pay any income tax. Yeah, income tax, that's a newer concept, income tax. And so what you should understand is that income tax was introduced and forced upon you. It's a new thing. And in fact, when it was first introduced, it was supposed to be temporary, not permanent. But anyways, you got income tax all of a sudden. So you're being taxed on the money you make. Then you have sales tax. You're being taxed on the money that you spend. So you got taxed 2 times on one single dollar. But that's not the craziest part as to why you guys are being trapped into unending poverty. Then you have inflation, which means that if you you made $1, you worked your butt off, you made $1, you got taxed on the income of the dollar. So that dollar went from $1 down to 70 cents straight away before you could even spend it. Then you spent your 70 cents and you bought something that was supposed to be 70 cents, but you got to pay taxes on it. So it's really like 80 cents because you pay taxes on it, right? Boom. Money gone, right? But if for some strange reason you got some more money, you put it in the bank, right? So you put $1 in the bank, and that dollar, let's say $1 can buy you 1 hamburger. And you might say, Marquette, that's crazy. Bruh, you used to be able to buy a hamburger with 30 cents. True story. My grandmother, she was alive during this time. You could buy a hamburger with 30 cents. Anyways, let's say $1 would buy you 1 hamburger. There's 2 forms of inflation that have occurred. This form where that $1 that you put in your bank, it could buy you 1 hamburger, except the American printing money. Why? Because the American government was overspending. Historically, a government will steal tax money from you. They'll collect taxes, which is theft, and then they'll take that tax money, and sometimes they'll build infrastructure, bridges, roads, they'll finance police and things like that, public schools, things that are good. But in America, they mostly like to finance war. If you pay taxes here, you are financing the war machine. And this was the claim of many folks who have had issues with America. Osama bin Laden was one such famous speaker who said the American population, if you have a democracy and you're allowing your democratic nation in which you can vote to continue being a warmonger on the planet Earth and being a profiteer and engaging in the military industrial complex, then you are at fault because you have the power of the vote and you have the power of the dollar, your tax dollar. So if you give your vote, you give your tax dollar, you surrender those 2 things, you are a part of the problem, which damn near seems like a fair assertion. But the point is this: America, to pursue their endless wars, they steal your tax money. And then they spend your tax money on the wars. But if they somehow don't have enough money for their super weapons of destruction, then they will borrow money. Sometimes they'll borrow money from China. Sometimes they'll create government bonds that they can sell to people, but they'll borrow money, which means that they're spending even more money than they've collected through the theft of taxes. And when they spend that extra money, they have debt, and the debt has to be serviced. So when the American government is paying back the debt, they're like, well, if we owe a bunch of money, we got to pay it back. So we're going to print more money. And when they print more money to service the debt that the government has irresponsibly created, now you as an individual, if you create debt, you're dumb, right? We call you dumb if you create debt. But the American government creates debt. We just call it politics. We just call it everyday life as a sucker in this country. So they create a bunch of debt. They got to service the debt. So American government prints a bunch of dollars. So now that $1 that you had in your bank account that could buy you 1 hamburger, Well, inflation has caused the price of that hamburger to go up to $1.40. So that same dollar is not worth as much because the spending power, the purchasing power is not the same because $1 can't get you one hamburger. Now you need $1.50 to get the same hamburger. That's one form of inflation. Here's another form of inflation, which you might not have noticed, but I definitely recently noticed, and it gets me angry. I went to Jack in the Box because I was starving. I've been busy and I was starving, and I didn't have any home cooked food. I was in transit on a busy day, so I went to Jack in the Box begrudgingly. And when I got that burger and I bit into it, it took 3 bites. I was like, this is barely meat. This is barely even meat. So they've degraded the quality of the meat such that they don't have to keep upping the price because the cost of their inputs, the cow beef, the cost of the vegetables, all that is going up, but they're trying to hold steady the price of the hamburger, so they degrade the quality of the meats. For example, and this is another thing I know to be a fact, the Whopper from Burger King. You might be like, why is this man talking about fast food right now? I want you to understand the Whopper from Burger King. When I was in the 3rd grade, I remember it like it was yesterday because it was damn near a routine. You leave elementary school, you walk home from elementary school in LA. There's a Burger King all the kids go to. You get a Whopper. It's 99 cents, massive thing. You eat it. You're completely full. The size of the Whopper. Did you know this is what they do? Initially, they tried to hold on to the Whopper being 99 cents, right? They tried to hold on to it being 99 cents. They didn't want to change the price. So you know what they did? They did another form of inflation because that $1 that you have in your bank is supposed to buy you one Whopper hamburger for 99 cents. They shrunk the size of the burger so they can keep the price the same. They just shrunk the size of the hamburger. So either inflation is going to hit you one of 2 ways. You're going to get less for your dollar. Oh, yeah, it's still 99-cent Whopper, but now it ain't a Whopper. It's smaller. Or, yeah, we had to increase the price. It's $1.50 for the Whopper. Now I think it's like $5-6. It's crazy, man. It's not even worth going to fast food anymore. By the time you get out of the fast food line, you just spent $25. You might as well go and dine in. Huh? Now, I say all that to say that your government did that to you through irresponsible spending, through intentionally printing money and causing inflation. And that does not hurt the government because the government is filled with wealthy people, plutocrats. They own real estate. They own stocks. They own assets. So their wealth is not eaten away at through inflation the same way yours is. Because if inflation raises prices, follow me, if inflation raises prices and you own a house that's $1 million, the price of your house is going to go up to $1.5 million. And you had your money, you bought a house for $1 million, inflation occurred, now your house is priced at $1.5 million. You didn't suffer. But if you had $1 million in cash and inflation occurred, now that million in cash is going to purchase less. That million in cash that you could have bought $1 million house with, you can't, because that $1 million house is now $1.5 million, 1.5. Do you understand me? These people have their money and assets. People who are middle class and lower class in America, they barely have savings. They don't have any assets. And the little bit of money they have is being eaten away at. So you're working harder and getting less. And you sit back like a goddamn dummy. I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, oh, I wish I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I regret voting for Biden. You hear Charlemagne the God. This dweeb is like, oh, I see how he's handling the migrant issue in New York. It's a problem. Now I regret voting for Biden. You dummy, you couldn't see that coming? Are you that dumb? Yes, you are. And that's the problem. We have too many people speaking up and they don't have any damn knowledge. Next time you hear somebody with a strong opinion on something, you say, go ahead and watch the Saint and the Sinner. Do you know as much as he does? If you don't, shut up and listen. You're a student, not a teacher. Shut up. We don't want to hear who you're voting for. It doesn't matter who you're voting for because you don't know a damn thing. I also went to university with a kid named David. Smart young man in electrical engineering and computer science. He was smart in that, but he was not smart in the way of politics. And I remember when Libya was being invaded, was being airily bombarded by America, and with Hillary Clinton as foreign secretary, I remember telling him that this was an evil thing. And he was like, no, Barack Obama, great guy. Democrats, great. Hillary, love her. And then fast forward 10 years later, we have slavery in Libya. Black Africans are being enslaved in Libya. Libya is in utter poverty today. It was clearly bad. I was right. He was wrong. But why was he wrong? He was wrong because he was too damn emotional. He was wrong because he's an ideologue. He was wrong because he's yielded to the propaganda that pervades Netflix. It pervades the news. And he was too arrogant to listen to someone who's actually studied and actually knows. You can tell the difference when I speak and when these random ass people speak about politics. They shouldn't talk about it because it requires study. Charlemagne the God telling you to go vote, when in reality, he shouldn't even be voting because he doesn't know what he's voting on. All of the best candidates never get anywhere near actually getting elected. Our system is extraordinarily corrupt. The only honest politician I could think of is Rand Paul. And he has no charm whatsoever, an inability to be an impactful public speaker, no umph, no real masculinity. He'll never win. And truth be told, he's probably corrupted because no one who is not corrupted can exist within our political system. It's that dirty. We are in revolutionary times. How do you live in the greatest country in America and there's no evidence of that? In the United Arab Emirates, cranes everywhere they're building. It's a dreamland. In China, cranes everywhere. They live in the future there. In America, decay, decrepit roads, hollowed out blocks of abandoned homes. Our infrastructure in decay. Our kids not being taught right. Immigrants, illegals invading our borders. We're housing them in the schools that are supposed to teach our kids, and we wonder why the kids don't know anything. Drug epidemics in the Midwest. Methamphetamines and fentanyl. We think we can protect ourselves from terrorism, but can't figure out how these drugs are getting in our borders. Somebody's lying. The brainwash is extraordinary. Imagine I flew into my own country as an American with an American passport. They searched me up like a criminal. Search me and everyone like a criminal. The guy at TSA barely speaks English, is telling me I'm not qualified for global entry. I've been flying around the world with no problems. They searched me like a criminal at TSA and they let strangers pour in through the southern border from various nations, not even having so much as a fingerprint. But you American citizens, they treat you like criminals in your own country where you pay taxes and you're a sheep and you take it. That doesn't disturb you. You don't wonder where has your human instinct for freedom gone to? Where has your spiritual inclination gone to? Have you forgotten what God is? You think these government people are God? You let them rule over you and tell you what to do as though they are not of flesh and blood like you are? We're so lost. When I experienced that false arrest that I still got a case for, there were a number of people who were arrested. They were not even American citizens. And when we went to the initial arraignment, 4 of them had their cases dropped. They were released back into the society. Weren't even American citizens, weren't even supposed to be here. They just released them back into the society. I remember when I was in high school, I spent all my time working and earning to earn my own car because my mother wouldn't buy me one and my father was in prison. I bought my own car, my first car. I was very proud. I parked it out in front. Woke up in the morning, it was totaled. A drunk person had driven into it and destroyed it. My mother told me she had saw him earlier and called the police. They came. He was an illegal. He had no insurance. This is not a new problem. This is an old problem. You should ask yourself, how is it that we can send satellites into the galaxies? We can put rocket men on the moon, but we can't close the borders. We can send precision missiles that can hit targets 10 miles away, but we can't figure out public education. I'm trying to understand how we have nuclear weapons, but we can't fix the potholes in the roads. You should be concerned, really. You should consider not following some of these rules. You should wonder if the authority is really an authority. These people who are ruling over us, are they really an authority? Because to me, they have no moral authority. These people are extraordinarily corrupt.
The world understands this perfectly well. They can see it. Ask anyone in Asia or the Middle East what the future looks like. And yet the populations of the English-speaking countries seem mostly unaware. They think that nothing has really changed. And they think that because no one has told them the truth. Their media outlets are corrupt. They lie to their readers and viewers. And they do that mostly by omission. For example, since the day the war in Ukraine began, American media outlets have spoken to scores of people from Ukraine, and they have done scores of interviews with Ukrainian President Zelensky. We ourselves have put in a request.
The whole thing is a scam. I mean, do you guys believe that Zelensky is in Ukraine in a war zone? Do you guys believe that Zelensky is ever on the front lines? You see Zelensky, he'll likes to wear that sweatshirt, or he'll wear a t-shirt or some military looking clothes. Do you believe that his life has been at risk at any point during the special military operation? Do you believe that? Do you ever wonder if there's some special agreement among gentlemen? You see, Russian presidents like, okay, our soldiers will kill your soldiers, but we're not going to kill you, Zelensky, because you're good with the Americans. You ever wonder if that's the case? Because I'm trying to figure out, like, Zelensky would be a meaningful target, right? If there's a legitimate war between Ukraine and Russia, Zelensky's a legitimate target. Why is he still alive? Has he been in Ukraine, or is the propaganda just trying to make it look like he's been in Ukraine? These are questions to ask in this era. And don't forget that when the war started, the American propaganda kept consistently telling you that Ukraine was winning the war. You remember that? It made no sense. I knew it was nonsense. You just look at the total population of Ukraine, look at the total population of Russia, then look at the economies before war. Ukraine was never a strong economy. I know this for a fact. I used to hire a ton of software developers from Ukraine because they work for nearly nothing. They're competent and they work for cheap. So it was a great place to hire people. And also the Ukrainian women, similar to the Russian women, are world-renowned gold diggers. Why are they gold diggers? Because they come from a poor country. Beautiful women from a poor country. They use their best asset because there's not much in the way of work after you go to university there. So, I mean, Ukraine was never a strong country. Surely they couldn't compete with Russia. We all knew this. Shout out to Cole, came in by Cash App. He writes, typical house mortgage was 3 to 5 years before 1930. That's crazy. I'm going to repeat that. Cole writes, the typical house mortgage was 3 to 5 years before 1930. How about that? It's funny how you think things get better with time. That's not always the case. May I acknowledge Carter, right? Studying Fin and Econ in uni. I appreciate this. Absolutely. May I acknowledge Orion with the baller alert. He writes, for the knowledge. I appreciate you. I acknowledge Charlie. He writes, I hate I'm ignorant in what you're talking about. Oh, you're not the only one, but you're a young man. And, that's the nature of being young. You don't know, you haven't had time to experience things. Sometimes what I experience is that I'll travel around the world and I'll observe something consistently. And then I start to understand, and then it might drive me down some research. Like, for example, one thing I find extremely disturbing to this day is that I can fly to South Korea right now. I can go to Incheon Airport right now and get through that sumbitch in 6 minutes. As a foreigner, 6 minutes. Then I come back to my country and I expect as a minimum 30 minutes, as a minimum, but more likely more. And I go through Incheon in 6 minutes, and they don't ask me any weird, dumb questions like, why are you here? Where were you? How much money do you have on you? Do you have any livestock with you? Like, nigga, do I look like I have a monkey in my suitcase? But then, that's at your home country, but in a foreign country, they're not asking any of this nonsense. Same thing is true of many countries, and it causes you to study and reflect once you start to observe a pattern emerging. And, that took time to be able to get those experiences. Shout out to Dalton. He writes, letting your light shine. Peace of the saints. I appreciate that. Shout out to the real ones. May I acknowledge Badek. He writes, tuition. The learned men, thank you for this good work. I appreciate you. And I just, sometimes I have to explain things like without a dry erase board, without graphics. And I just hope that people are able to follow it, because these are new concepts. And in some cases, they're a bit sophisticated. And so I try my best to make it simple with the hamburgers. I acknowledge Josh. He writes, tuition. Appreciate you. Came in by PayPal. Magnaj Irvin, he writes, peace to the saints. Thank you for the assassin community. Indeed, and this community will have to do something at some point.
Request for an interview with Zelensky, and we hope he accepts. But the interviews he's already done in the United States are not traditional interviews. They are fawning pep sessions specifically designed to amplify Zelensky's demand that the U.S. enter more deeply into a war in Eastern Europe and pay for it. That is not journalism. It is government propaganda. Propaganda of the ugliest kind, the kind that kills people. At the same time, our politicians and media outlets have been doing this.
By the way, while he's speaking about government propaganda, can I help you guys with something, especially for the racists who are in attendance today, of which they're inevitably here? You hear people say things like crime, right? Like, for example, murder is considered a crime unless you're the government, right? Because what is war other than mass murder? War is mass murder. So if you're an individual and you commit murder, you're about to go to jail in America for sure. But if you're a politician and you order mass murder, which is war, then it's all good, buddy. And in fact, it doesn't even matter really who you kill. Do you think that American presidents haven't killed an infinite number of children in our affairs in Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and the list goes on indefinitely? Yeah, absolutely they have. Absolutely. Almost every American president is a legitimate war criminal. And you'll notice consistently, we never fight anyone our own size. We always fight a country that's like maybe half the size of Texas, maybe twice the size of Vermont. But it's not like a country that could fight back, right? That wouldn't be fun, would it?
Promoting a foreign leader like he's a new consumer brand, not a single Western journalist has bothered to interview the president of the other country involved in this conflict, Vladimir Putin. Most Americans have no idea why Putin invaded Ukraine or what his goals are now. They've never heard his voice. That's wrong. Americans have a right to know all they can about a war they're implicated in, and we have the right to tell them about it because we are Americans too.
Shout out to Tucker. Like, bro is putting tens on this. Like, if I was him, I'd probably do the same thing. So he's suggested that other reporters haven't tried to interview Vladimir Putin. That's not the case. The Kremlin has acknowledged that that is not the case. And so, yeah. Anyway, shout out to Prince of All Saints. He writes, just tuned in. Funny how everyone supports when it's about females, but doesn't support when it's about more significant topics. And, you know, those are the things that I try not to, you don't see me angry about it. I might be disappointed, but I try to accept it very quickly and move on. You know, it just is what it is. But for those of us who are knowledgeable, we will inherit the earth. We will be the rulers of the earth. Acknowledge crowned king supporting the work. Shout out to Andrew. Acknowledge Darylyn came right back. She writes, please continue, Mr. Burton. I appreciate that. Shout out to the ladies, Saint Jeremy. That's a good woman right there. Shout out to Keegan writes, these are my favorite lives. Please keep it going. Peace of the Saints. Shout out to Troca writes, your insight on these important topics is invaluable. Question. How familiar are you with the history and eventual breakup of Yugoslavia? Not familiar enough. Is that where Tito was in Yugoslavia? He writes, would you do a session relating to this topic? I can't promise it. Let's see. Tito, Yugoslavia. Was I right? Tito, former president of Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Damn, I'm good. You see, the challenge is that, I used to read until I would fall out sleeping, just like fall out sleeping of exhaustion. Yeah, I used to devour literature, but there's some places that are, I could take you through the history and it would only be an exercise in the mind because they're not currently meaningful pawns on the global chessboard. Like, for example, I could take you through the history of Spain, which is quite fascinating, really. One of the things I find comical about Spanish history is that the Europeans never like to admit that, Franco was a dictator there and kind of lasted longer than he should have. And that the Western powers were cool with that. But Spain is a bygone power. They'll never be a power again. And they're a struggling economy. Lovely place. I hear good looking women. I haven't had any business there. I haven't stopped in. I'd like to. But the fact is that it wouldn't necessarily be very meaningful to look into that. The truth is where power and money is centered today and tomorrow is in China, the Middle East, and sub-Saharan Africa. So those are the places we probably need to make a study, because that's where we are going to make our fortune. Um, so no, I probably wouldn't do Yugoslavia. So I'm not going to say no. Maybe you ask me again, keep putting it on my mind. It might happen. And that's just because time is limited, and we always have to ask ourselves, how can we extract the most value out of our time and our efforts? Shout out to DJ Berserk supporting the work. Tito comes in supporting the work. Appreciate you, man. I also acknowledge Lucky Street. Saint DS supporting the work. He writes, Quet using Burger King example. Do you think they're doing the same thing with land? Oh man, there's something really weird going on with land, bro. Listen to me. The last trip I went on was specifically to buy land. Nobody wants to sell land. Nobody wants to sell land. It's very strange and concerning. And also, there's a lot of laws that prevent foreigners from buying land in most countries. Here's the comedy. In America, we let foreigners buy land. Look at Las Vegas and see who owns Las Vegas, which foreign nation owns a lot of Las Vegas. He writes, reducing land, keeping the prices the same, and safeguarding it for certain people. Correct. Just engaging in the discussion. Shout out to Deeply Goated, writes, peace to the saints.
Freedom of speech is our birthright. We were born with the right to say what we believe. That right cannot be taken away no matter who is in the White House. But they're trying anyway. Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning. Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again. But this time, we came to Moscow anyway. We are not here because we love Vladimir Putin. We are here because...
I just do not like the way this boy says Putin, but we're going to rewind it back and let him say it again. Go ahead, bro.
Certainly did exactly the same thing once again. But this time, we came to Moscow anyway. We are not here because we love Vladimir Putin. We are here because we love the United States. We want to remain...
I ain't going to lie. That didn't make any sense. Brody said, we're here. We're here in Russia because we love the United States. I was like, I don't know if that entirely makes sense, Tucker. My boy is stretching this shit. Honestly, he's stretching it, because the truth is the people who are watching you, Tucker, are the ones who already know this is important, and you're probably not going to reach new audience in all likelihood. And frankly, the people that you're saying you're trying to save, they're the ones who need education. And what you do, Tucker, you do information. I do education. You do information. So no, you're going to get a lot of ad rev. You're going to ball out, Tucker, and that's a beautiful thing. And you are doing something for the intellectuals. I mean, I'm fascinated to hear what Putin has to say. I already know what he's going to say because he said it many times already. And also we've heard from Sergei Lavrov, who's a very articulate statesman. So we already know what's going to be said, those of us who study this thing, but I appreciate it. But nah, Tucker, you putting them extras on that, boy. Shout out to Philip, writes, peace of the saints, tuition.
Prosperous and free. We paid for this trip ourselves. We took no money from any government or group, nor are we charging people to see the interview. It is not behind a paywall. Anyone can watch the entire thing, shot live to tape and unedited, on our website, tuckercarlson.com. Elon Musk, to his great credit, has promised not to suppress or block this interview once we post it on his platform, X, and we're grateful for that. Western governments, by contrast, will certainly do their best to censor this video on other less principled platforms because that's what they do. They are afraid of information they can't control. But you have no reason to be afraid of it. We are not encouraging you to agree with what Putin may say in this interview, but we are urging you to watch it. You should know as much as you can. And then, like a free citizen and not a slave, you can decide for yourself.
You know, this is quite ironic, because the argument that the United States used to make against the former Soviet Union is that they're not free. And that's what the American propagandists were telling to the Soviet citizens, is like, you know, your leaders have you so tightly controlled. And here's the kicker. Get this. The United States used to tell the Soviet Union citizens, like, you guys are poor. Like, you guys don't have convertibles. You don't have Coca-Cola. You don't have television. You don't have this. You don't have that. You guys are poor. Don't you want to be rich? Don't you want to own your own home? Don't you want the American dream? Why don't you be more like us, America? Be free, be a democracy, be capitalist. And so they picked apart the Soviet Union through various means. And now, here's the funny thing. The Soviet Union was a tightly controlled authoritarian regime that did suppress freedom of speech and did have a very large state police apparatus, secret police, the KGB, which is something that Vladimir Putin was formerly a part of. And now America has the same thing. I mean, we don't even comprehend what the different agencies do. Like, for example, I always thought the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, federal, I thought that was like about like the United States. I thought the FBI operated within America, and I thought the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, was, you know, the folks who operated abroad. Now, apparently, the mandate of the FBI has expanded just monumentally. They're operating outside of America, and the CIA is continuing to be a shadowy organization that commits much crime against humanity. So I say that to say now America has become what it used to accuse the USSR of being, a huge state police state situation with insane amounts of spying, you know, incarcerating political prisoners. Is that what's happening to Donald Trump? He's a guy running for president and he's being put on trial. Come on. This is textbook authoritarian regimes suppressing freedom of speech. Cancel culture, that's what that is. Cancel culture is the suppression of freedom of speech. The Twitter files, it revealed that the American government is controlling media, which is also known as the fourth branch of government. So we clearly don't have a free press. These are all of the things that we accuse USSR of. But here's the most damning one, and you guys mark my words, I think I'm the only person talking about it on a consistent basis, which is lies. You might say, Mark, well, what do you mean? Well, the problem is when governments start lying to itself, they start fudging numbers, misreporting data, misrepresenting data. And as a result, they can't properly manage budgets. They can't forecast. They can't do the work of government because they're lying about the realities of the society that they're running. What I mean is this, like, for example, California is a very easy example. When you look at their efforts to alleviate homelessness, the state of California have programs where they spend $200,000 per homeless person to house them. So it's like you're spending more than the average Californian makes to house your least productive citizens who are least likely to give anything back to the society and who certainly didn't pay taxes because they're homeless. So you're overinvesting in unproductive liabilities. And more importantly, you're misrepresenting the outcomes of your program, claiming that it's a big success when it's clearly a big failure, because not only are you seeing that the population of homeless people are increasing dramatically, the population of productive wage earners who pay taxes are decreasing dramatically. They're moving to Florida and other places with good climate and good tax situation. But California is still swearing up and down that they're doing a good job, which is called lying, misrepresenting the data. And when you misrepresent the data for too long, you know, those credit card payments, those debts are going to add up. You know, you're living the high life, you're spending, but you're lying about your financial reality. And that's what's occurring nationwide. And that's what was occurring in the USSR. They were over reporting production. And when you over-report production in the USSR, so for example, if they say we've harvested this many tons of grain and this many tons of oats and this many tons of fill in the blank with a staple food that people need to eat in Russia, so they say we've harvested this much, and say, okay, so if we've harvested this much, we can export this percentage of it. Well, it turns out that we overestimated and we lied about what we harvested. So now that we're going to export this out of the country, we've scarcely left anything for our citizens to consume because we lied about the amount we created and we exported damn near everything to keep up with our lie. Carrying on.
Suspected as much due to Carlson's recent Moscow appearance. The former Fox News host released a video yesterday highlighting the reasons why he thought it was important to hear what Putin had.
Can someone tell me what are the qualifications for this job? You're reading off of a teleprompter. You're a dweeb reading off of a teleprompter. Your glasses don't match your necktie. It's like you literally have no skills except reading, and you have the nerve to put on a necktie that doesn't match your glasses and then read in a like very boring tone that we've heard 1,000 other people speak with. Like, what are the qualifications? I'm legitimately curious. Like, how do you get this job? Number one, I can read. Oh, you're hired. And then how do you get fired? Like, how do you mess up this job? I'm just curious. Like, how do you do that?
To say, let's take a look.
Here's why we're doing it.
him for conducting the interview. Presidential hopeful RFK Jr. posted. Former GOP candidate for president Vivek Ramaswamy wrote, "Been given numerous."
Point out something. Here's another problem in the American democracy that most people don't notice. The reason for not the reason for, but one of the major features of a democracy is that you don't have dynastic politics, dynasties, which are connected to royal families, connected to blood, heritage, lineage. That is problematic because in all likelihood, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. And what I mean by that is if you have a talented father, it's unlikely the son is going to be as talented. So what I'm saying is if you have George Bush Sr. as the president of the United States, it's highly unlikely that his son just happens to be the most talented man in the United States when it's time for him to run for president, right? So we do have dynastic politics in America, which is to say that we have the Kennedy family, we have the Clintons, we have, the George Bush Sr. So the father runs the government of America, then the son runs the government, and all these people are governors here, senator, congressman here, and they're all related. That lets you know that we have patronage in politics. We have crony capitalism. We have a situation wherein you have to be in the in group. There really is a swamp. When Donald Trump speaks of the swamp, it exists, and these people are literally related to each other. And it doesn't matter if they have talent or not because they're getting in through the back door. Your democracy is fiction. This fellow right here who's being quoted, he's Robert F. Kennedy. Does that name sound familiar? Kennedy? And it's ironic when you look at the origins of the Kennedy family fortune, it's from crime. You have a bootlegger, an alcohol, a Catholic who engaged in crime and made it to the top, and now his family is entrenched. And this guy doesn't stand a chance of getting political office. I don't even know why they call him a presidential hopeful. He has that gravelly voice due to some unfortunate health ailment. But the fact that they're quoting him is just because he has that family name, and America is not supposed to be a place like Europe where you have these big family names like he's from the Clausewitz family or he's from the Kaiser Wilhelm family. That's not the American thing. America is supposed to be based on merit. Guys like Benjamin Franklin, you come up out of nowhere. You're a brilliant man. You're an inventor. You're a great businessman. We're going to revere you and respect you based on your merit in this meritocracy, not based on your last name or your heritage or where you come from. And that's what it's turned to really quickly. And it's been that way for some time. And that is what we have to fix. That is not what this place is supposed to be. And if you think that America is not as corrupt as any sub-Saharan African nation you could find, you're just a fool. If you think that somehow those other countries are more corrupt than us, it's just because you're brainwashed. If you believe the following, you're a nut. For example, when the American media got a hold of the Yevgeny Prigozhin situation where he died in that, I think it was a plane crash in Russia. Now, here's a funny thing. Notice he was a part of the Russian government, essentially, because he was running paramilitary, right? So he was, in fact, a traitor because he tried to commit a coup in Russia. So that is a traitor. What is the punishment for treason around the world? It is capital punishment everywhere in the world. The penalty for treason is death. Now, he ended up dying supposedly of an accident that occurred in an aircraft. Cool. So the American media, as soon as they heard of that, they're like, the Russian government killed him. Russian government killed him. Putin killed him. Okay. All right. So you believe that Putin and the Russian government killed Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was in fact a traitor. But then you got Jeffrey Epstein, who you believe he committed suicide in his cell? Stop it, love. How is it that all of the American media, they report consistently that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell, when common sense would suggest that, no, he didn't commit suicide. He was probably killed. So you believe that Epstein committed suicide, but Prigozhin was killed by the government of Russia. No way that the American government killed Epstein because he committed suicide. And was there video footage of that? No video footage of it? Oh, interesting. Did he ever say he was suicidal? Oh, interesting. All of it. Fascinating. Shout out to the ballers. Mamba's office with the baller alert writes, peace to the Saints with a back-to-back ballin'. Shout out to Chris. He writes, nothing at all. I guess he just said, I'm a baller and let the money talk. May I also acknowledge Felix supporting the work, writes, peace to the Saints.
primetime interviews. Osama bin Laden has been interviewed before. We have a right to hear from everyone, no matter how you
was so gung-ho on Carlson's interview. CNN's Christiane Amanpour.
Like, this broad is talentless. Like, shout out to her hair, which might be natural. I definitely like that. But Shorty looked like she has no soul. Look at the way she's reading from the teleprompter. I'm about to enlarge her soulless zombie-like ass. You could tell, like, this chick is not invested in the work at all.
But not everyone was so gung-ho on Carlson's interview. CNN's Christiane Amanpour responded to accusations leveled by Carlson.
She looking at the teleprompter with that dead face.
to try and derail the interview. Let's take a look.
Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news.
Zelensky has gotten a lot of softball interviews that the mainstream press should be critical of. Of course, it's true that people who are, has ever tried to interview Putin, he's the one that's been given access that others apparently have not been given access.
And then hitting them with some hard questions. That is something that is an established practice going on in Russia.
Yeah, I agree. It is interesting, these accusations now that his phone is being tapped and that...
Now, that's kind of strange. They said it's accusations that Carlson's phone is being is being tapped. Well, aren't all of our phones being tapped? Yes. Was it the Patriot Act that allowed for the endless spying on American citizens? You'd be a fool to think that your communications are not being monitored. I mean, that's silliness. Your communications are not recently being monitored. Your communications haven't been monitored just since the Patriot Act. Your communications were being monitored before that. Come on, please.
Messages are being leaked in order to stop.
In fact, let me give you one good example. We hear these stories that are just, they don't even seem sensible. There's one thing you should remember is that the government is a gang. They're little more than a street gang, highly organized, extraordinarily ruthless. And the governments of the world, they're street gangs, they're street soldiers, they're thugs, or the police force, right? Now, the worst thing for a gang is for a rival gang to appear on the scene, right? So you have to suppress any rival gang. So when you look at certain leaders emerging or certain organizations emerging, you have to marginalize them. So the government, anytime they hear of a leader coming up, they want to marginalize the leader. You guys have heard of Waco, even though it's been largely suppressed. I think Waco was the largest gunfight in American history since the Civil War. And Waco was a small religious community that was led by one gentleman named David Koresh, who was a Bible thumper, knew the Bible well. He played guitar. He could sing a little bit. This is a typical things in these types of leaders. They have a way of charming the population, and average people, they succumb to, sports and entertainment very easily. So anyways, David Koresh had a little group of people in Waco, Texas, who followed him religiously. And religion is generally a dangerous thing. There's no difference between a cult and religion. Just for those of you who think that your religion is legit, no, it's not. A religion and a cult, it's the same thing. Just the difference is that the cult leaders tend to be a bit more kooky and often think they are God. And sometimes they end up engaging in violence. But it's not a major difference. Kind of essentially the same things are in common with religion, except cults are smaller, right? Smaller. And they're not as long standing. So anyways, you had David Koresh in Waco, Texas. This was the claim of the American government. Tell me if this sounds correct. Now, mind you, your mail, like your mail is supposed to be a private thing. You receive mail. No one's supposed to be able to open it. It is, in fact, illegal to open up the mail of others. And at that time in America, there was this pretend that people were not having their mail spied on or their phones tapped by the American government, right? There's a lot of pretend and lies. And so the question was, how did the government find out that David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, as they were called, how did the government find out that these people were stockpiling weapons? Which is your right. It is your right to buy guns, as many as you like, especially in a place like Texas, which I think has one of the higher concentrations of personal firearm ownership. And these people were out in a fairly remote place anyways. So they're stockpiling weapons. But the trouble came is when they supposedly were discovered to be modifying weapons such that they were automatic or creating, automatic, or acquiring machine guns or having grenades. And the lie that the U.S. government claimed was this. This is how they found out that these people were a problem, supposedly. The U.S. government claimed that a mail carrier observed that a grenade part fell out of a package that was being delivered to the Branch Davidians compound, to David Koresh's compound in Waco, Texas. So a component of a grenade just fell out of the package, and then they called ATF, the government. Does that sound believable? Number one, does it sound believable that someone shipping grenade parts is not going to do a good job at sealing the package? In fact, I can't remember the last time I received a package that was open, and I'm not ordering grenade parts. I'm ordering like t-shirts, underwear, basic things, socks. So do you think that they would send grenade parts and not properly package it? That's number one. Then number two, do you think that a mail carrier can recognize spare parts or the components, rudiments of a grenade? No. A mail carrier cannot recognize the parts and components of a grenade. And number three, what is the likelihood that the mail carrier observed one little part come out that was a piece of a grenade, and then he said, let me call the ATF? See, these stories don't add up is what I'm pointing out to you. What I'm telling you is that the government lies about how they discovered this. They're scanning all of your packages and in some cases inspecting your packages and resealing them and giving them off to you after they verify that there's nothing that would challenge government power. The thing that challenges government power is the potential of violence. That's the only reason anybody pays taxes. You don't pay taxes because you believe in the American government and you think they're doing a good thing with your money. They're absolutely not doing a good thing with your money. If you got to vote, should we support Ukraine or should we abolish or absolve us of student loan debt? You would have voted to clean out your student loan debt. And guess what? All the money we sent to Ukraine, we could have cleared out student loan debt. You would have voted to clean out your own student loan debt instead of send this money to strangers who care nothing about you. Huh? Yes. That is what we're dealing with. The government that's lying to you. And the only question is, are you fool enough to believe them? Shout out to Lil Jimmy. He writes, I had a major news publication write a hit piece on my father and I. What? Most of the article is untrue. If it is factually untrue, hopefully, not hopefully, but if it is untrue and it's slanderous, then I think the best thing for you to do is to reach out to them asking for a retraction and a correction, and also reach out to a lawyer. That's really the main thing that these people respect. So when you write, how should we go against moving past? How should we go against moving passes? That doesn't make sense. So your option is option one, try to get a retraction. Option is also to lawyer up and deal with them for libel and slander. And in the absence of that, you could also bury it, which is to say, how are people accessing this information? They're probably accessing it online. The question is, how do you, bury that information online by creating other articles or other resources that are on the same topic that are going to be newer and more viewed? Wishing you much success in that. I'm sorry to hear that. That sounds unpleasant. Shout out to Hills in supporting the work via Venmo. Mr. Brown writes, peace to the saints. How many people do you think will be enough to gather to meet the mayor about God Almighty's grand unified theorem education programs? I think you probably need about 500 minimum. May I acknowledge Alan? He writes, peace to the saints. Appreciate you, Alan. Shout out to Bodek. He writes, fire. They absolutely need to hear this. To the males who don't stand up for these sessions, be ashamed of yourselves. You are nothing more than a TikTok whore. Real life knowledge and game right now. Sit up and pay attention in a real way. May I acknowledge, okay, up there. May I acknowledge Craig writes, peace of the saints tuition. Shout out to Dreams writes, the big homie, learning more here than class. Indeed. Shout out to Carter. He writes, Fin and Econ. Oh, finance and economics. Okay, got it. Shout out to Anthony Tibbs supporting the work. Writes, peace to the saints. Shout out to Carter. He writes, may I acknowledge via PayPal. Saint Diego writes, for today. Thank you for asking me that. I am grateful to have my own storefront. That's always been something that I've wanted to have, because when I had offices, throughout the country and the world, they were in like high rises often. And, when you're a young person growing up, your initial view of entrepreneurship is like the local barber, the local guy who has a clothing store, and they're like storefronts, it's things that everyone can see and walk by. But historically, all the offices that I opened were in high rises. My office in Puerto Rico is in a high rise. My office in Chicago is in a high rise. My office in Cincinnati is in a high rise. My office in Erie, Pennsylvania is in a high rise. My office in Pangyo, South Korea is in a high rise. And so this feels like a lot more a part of the community. I kind of like it. People are starting to come by and like knock on the window like on a consistent basis. People who are familiar. And so that's kind of cool. I like that. I'm very thankful for that. He writes, "You are much appreciated. Would you consider doing a video breaking down true Marxism versus Leninism / communism?" I probably wouldn't, in as much as it's very much so an intellectual thing. And I don't think everyday people will ever truly understand or be persuaded by those ideologies, like the depth of them. They'll be persuaded by the simple things like, yeah, we're all equal, that kind of thing, which is a lie. We're not all equal. So I don't think that there's going to be much value, because I don't think either any of those ideological systems or those frameworks rather are applicable to today. And so I really wouldn't want to dig into those. Shout out to Craig. He writes, "Peace of the Saints tuition. Appreciate you. May I also acknowledge Jose." He writes, "Thoughts on 53M credit card plan for NYC migrants?" I think it's insane. Jose, I think it's insane, bruh. I mean insane in the literal sense. I think it's actually showing that there are mentally ill people running the government there. And hey, let us remember that New York is already expensive, right? So you're dealing with an expensive city whereby people are struggling, and now you have a whole new population of unskilled labor, I'm not saying low IQ, but low educational attainment, low skill labor. And you're bleeding a city that's already been losing population and where it's already expensive to live. It just seems like an extraordinarily bad idea. Just very bad. And I'm glad I don't live in New York, and I've never had a desire to live in New York. I've always known that New York is a sick place. When you stack human beings up on top of each other like that, you have a place that's really devoid of culture itself, you got a bad situation. By the way, shout out to the ballers. Mr. Brown writes, "Peace of the Saints." Sent an email. I already answered it. Thank you very much. Shout out to Dorian writes, "Peace of the Saints. Truly appreciate you." Carrying on.
Off the interview. Do you understand what that argument is, or how would be well tailored to actually stopping the interview from happening?
So I remember this accusation being levied that the messages were leaked in order to put pressure on subjects. So that would not surprise me at all if they're taking the position that he hasn't said anything that they could find. The New York Times did a whole story on it. They couldn't find anything he'd said that was pro-Russian or pro the Russian war, and it's another one of those Russian cancel culture stories.
Yeah,
I'll probably talk about it in more detail.
You're completely right about the tone, the tenor of speech rights in Europe being really, really cold. There was a story in Intercept earlier this week about
HBO.
Okay, so now they're actually talking about something interesting. I'm sorry to have to fast forward through these guys. It's just that the blonde fella's voice is very annoying.
Russian actor had been cast in the third season of White Lotus.
Mm-hmm.
We're both fans of that show, I think. The Ukrainian government put pressure on HBO to fire him, and they did so ostensibly for like pro-Russian statements he'd made. You can't find a single pro-Russian statement. This person, it's just banal. The violence is bad, and I hope the war ends. But he'd gotten some kind of award from the Russian government years ago, but he hasn't said anything that they could find. The New York Times did a whole story on it. They couldn't find anything he'd said that was pro-Russian or pro the Russian war, and it's another.
So he's referring to someone who was basically fired by HBO for supposedly being pro-Russian. And what I want you all to be aware of, and that's why I found it really comical. There's one demon on a podcast who accused me of being broke, which is not to me, that's not a scary thing. It's not a shameful thing. Most people are broke. And what I am aware of is that if you actually are to do something impactful in this sick society, that's one of the first places you'll be attacked, is financially. They'll try to take your freedom. They'll try to take your wealth. And they'll try to do it in parallel, which is to say they'll try to take your wealth while they're taking your freedom, which is to say sending you through endless court proceedings that are expensive. The government has an infinite amount of money because they steal from taxpayers, and then they also print money endlessly. And you have a finite amount of money, so they'll kind of like make you burn through your money trying to maintain your freedom, and then they'll leave you in poverty. And if they can't do that to you, then they'll Muhammad Ali you, or they'll Al Capone you, and then use the tax man to trump up some charges, and then put you in endless debt. So either way, I say that to say, if you are going to do something, you have to know that you'll be following the model of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, following the model of Jesus, who said, leave all that you have and follow me, the Son of God. I have nothing. And that's what you have to be ready to do. You have to be willing to sacrifice. So right now they're talking about someone who is experiencing an involuntary sacrifice just because he was too close, apparently, to the Russian regime.
They're one of those Russian cancel culture stories.
Yeah,
I'll probably talk about it in more detail.
You're completely right about the tone, the tenor of speech rights in Europe being really, really cold. There was a story in The Intercept earlier this week about German media giant Axel Springer saying that From the River to the Sea is a verboten statement, obviously in the context of Palestinians, and then running ads in their own paper from Israel that uses that exact phrase, from the river to the sea. And so there's all of there was, I think, especially
for those of you who are not familiar, the term or the phrase from the river to the sea is basically speaking about endlessly expanding Israel and thereby gobbling up the land of other groups of Arabs, basically taking people's land such that Israel can continue its expansion.
in Germany, because of the history of the Holocaust, a real shutdown on pro-Palestinian speech in particular. But you're seeing that is enabled by this broader culture where there just isn't the same kind of protection for First Amendment protected activities. And I think you're right. It gets the obvious critique. I remember we covered a interview between.
Her voice is also annoying. Maybe we should just have beautiful women. I mean, she looks beautiful women with decent voices, and then like men with proper, Walter Cronkite voices. You feel me? It's just like, it's the easiest job on earth. You're reading off a teleprompter. Can we just find someone with a better voice? I mean, come on.
Between Kamala Harris and Katie Couric recently, where after a tough line of questions from Katie.
Damn, I forgot about Kamala Harris. She's still alive. That's crazy. Didn't you guys forget about Kamala Harris too? Maybe they like hiding her ass in the back. Like, I guess she has low approval ratings. They don't let her go outside anymore. I totally forgot she was alive. That's insane. Shout out to Mr. Chambliss. He writes, Warqueto mania. It is painful for the intellectuals to see documentaries about the influence of Louis Vuitton, colored metal water bottles, shoes, and concerts instead of morality. Right.
Couric, Katie says, well, now we're going to go talk about some more positive things, the campaign. And Kamala Harris goes, good. and it did kind of give the impression that she said, look, you got to have to put up with me for these few minutes of tough questions.
At all, then it's obviously not worth doing if there are so many conditions put. We actually asked him tougher questions than he almost ever got asked in any sort of amazing.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. Like, the weird thing is this title reads EU wants to sanction Tucker Carlson. I skipped through. I didn't hear any mention of the EU seeking to do this. So this seems like a clickbait title, unfortunately, and these people did not deliver. Sometimes you get clickbaited into clicking a video, but then you hope that you'll be pleasantly pleasantly surprised, impressed with the level of articulation, information. These people under-delivered in all categories. Shout out to Lee. He writes, modern McCarthyism equals cancel culture. That's a very good point. That is a very good point. Absolutely.
Mainstream.
And it's sad how often history repeats. It's like human beings, they just stay stupid. They just stay stupid. Ladies and saints, I'll give you some time to send in your comments, questions as we wind down. I think I've said enough for today, in as much as I've been awake since 2 a.m.